Hi there, this is Catherine with Unfolded Heart Music. Welcome back to Lyre Foundations. We're going to begin today Chapter 2. Last time we finished Chapter 1 and talked about a lot of the setup and things that we need to know before we even really get started. Chapter 2 is going to be working on dexterity, finger strength, and two-handed coordination. So a lot more exercises and really getting into actually playing the lyre. We're going to start with a general introduction, and then we'll go into specifically Lesson 1 for Chapter 2. So let's jump in. All right, just a brief word before we begin Lesson 1 for Chapter 2, a brief word about what the Chapter 2 is all about in the first place. I've already summarized it with a title that is Dexterity, Hand or Finger Strength, both, and Two-Handed Coordination. One word of just encouragement to you is that if you find these exercises or these practices a little bit tedious or a little bit dry, just to recognize that it's a really helpful and important part of gaining greater freedom with the lyre and with your playing. In a certain sense, the whole point of being able to focus on these exercises is to develop the capacity to not have to worry about and think about some of the more technical side of playing, and to be able to focus on the musicality of the song that you're actually playing. Of course, doing these sorts of exercises is something that's ongoing, so it's not something that you'll start and then later sort of give it up or not need anymore. But rather it's something that you won't have to develop in the same kind of way. It will be developed, and so it's more of a maintenance when you go forward. It's kind of like, if you think about it, at a certain time in your life you had to learn to walk, and now maybe you go on walks that you really enjoy in beautiful places or with wonderful people, and though you're still exercising the same physical and bodily coordination to be able to walk just like you did when you were very little, you don't even think about it now. And so in a certain way you're still practicing walking, but you don't have to think about it, and it allows you, it is sort of the foundation from which you can then go and walk in different places, or even do things like jog or run, skip, do all sorts of things like that. So it's kind of similar to that, where we have to focus on it to a certain extent at the beginning so that we don't have to focus on it later. Another way to say that is we focus on it now so that it doesn't get in the way later, which is something that will happen if we don't take the time to really develop these skills in our both mind and also in our hand and our physical strength and coordination that we're going to need as we play any musical instrument, and the lyre is no exception to that. So be patient, and also use it as an opportunity to get to know the lyre more and more, and to enjoy this relationship between your mind and your hand that will really start to develop as you go through these exercises. And there's a kind of beauty and joy to that connection and to that familiarity, again, with your mind and your hand in connection with the lyre. So again, just a word of encouragement for you, and a little bit of context of why these activities and exercises are so important. So let's go now to the specific content of Lesson 1, and we'll move on from there. Okay, so in Lesson 1, it's sort of the predecessor to all the other lessons in Chapter 2. So again, the rest of the lessons in Chapter 2 will have exercises for different capacities and for building up different things in your hands. But we first need to know how to place our hands on the lyre and how to actually pluck the string. This is something we haven't talked about yet. We've talked about other things like your general posture, how to hold the lyre, but we haven't looked really closely, sort of zoomed into the actual placement of the hand on the lyre. So we're going to do this in sort of 5 different parts. They're very small parts, but we'll do this in 5 different parts today. The first is suggestions for general hand posture, so talking about my whole hand. The second is suggestions for hand placement for both of your hands. If you're going to do two-handed playing, how do we do that on the lyre? The third will be finger placement, or your grip on the string, so focusing now specifically on where the string will hit your finger. The fourth is how to pluck or pull the string. And then the fifth is a very small note about finger numbers, and I'll explain what that is when we get there. Before we jump in, I also want to give just a quick word of transparency here so that everything is very clear, that what I'm going to be teaching here are suggestions. This is what I use. This is how I play the lyre. And this is not a a more general or broad way of playing the lyre. For example, some people use the strumming method, some people use the gliding method, some people use the harp plucking method. I've, studied in a certain degree some of those and have utilized things that I felt like worked or didn't work. But I'm not going to be explaining those particular techniques that have a very specific way of doing it. Rather, I'm going to be teaching you and showing you the personal way that I do it, and which leads to the kind of music that, again, I'm able to play. And so that's why I've said many times that if you want to learn how to play the music that I play, then this is a great course for you. If not, you need to look at somebody who uses a different method to be able to produce a different sound and different kinds of music. This is something I've been using for years now, so it's not something I just pulled out of my back pocket, and it's something that's very comfortable and works very well in order for me to have the kind of freedom and just the style of playing to be able to move around on the lyre, play different kinds of music with chords or not chords, all sorts of different things like that. So that's why I'm sharing it with you, because I think it would be very helpful, and also it's just simply the way that I play, so that's why it's the best for me to teach, rather than teaching something that I don't actually use. So just want to make that really clear so that you're not confused if you're watching somebody else's videos. I would encourage you to do what is really best for you, but to really consider what's working and what's not, rather than using shortcuts. That would be my only very specific recommendation. Okay, so let's jump in now to those 5 different categories, and we'll look at more closely how to put our hands on the lyre and move on from there. Okay, let's begin now with suggestions for hand posture. We are on page 16 in the Lyre Foundations course booklet, and you can read those different bullet points there. I would very much encourage you to do so, and certainly the image there. I think it's a really helpful image. It really summarizes with both hands, my right and my left hand, how I actually hold my hand. Okay. So the basic idea is that my hand is slightly curved. All right, I'm going to do my best to show this as clearly as possible. I'm going to probably have to try and rearrange a little bit in between here. But I do not do a harp hand, you could say, where the thumb is high above. Okay, I don't find that conducive for the lyre, both in its size, the height at which it sits in relation to my body and my arm, and also the way in which I pluck the string. So my thumb is not up here, it's dropped down and is even with the rest of my fingers, more or less. Okay. I do not have my hands straight, I don't have them way curved, but really, it really is just quite a natural curve in the hand. So my hand looks about like that. Kind of a C shape, you could say. One way to test this is if you just put your arm down by your side, there's going to be a natural curve in your fingers, and that's about the degree of curve that I use. Again, I do this in both the right and the left hand. And the reason why this curve is so important is because if my hands are straight or, curved, I don't know how you could do it more curved, but especially if they're straight, you don't have a lot of strength in your hand that you're utilizing. So this is kind of a theme that that comes about in several of our lessons now, is how do we utilize our body in the way that it's actually given to us? How do we utilize all the muscles in our forearm and our hands and our fingers and all of that? So here's another aspect of that. If you have a little curve, you then have some strength. When I pull a string, I've got somewhere to go with it, and I have access to all these muscles here all the way up to my elbow, and I would argue even to my shoulder. But if I am just here and I'm kind of barely hitting the string, I don't have a lot of control. I don't have a lot of strength in regards to sound and dynamics, and it's very easy to miss the string. So having some curve and giving it a nice pull. We'll get to the pluck in a second, but making sure you have a nice curve to your hand. I've already said this before, but make sure that your hand, especially this back hand, the one that's behind the lyre right here, for me it's my left hand because I have the lyre on my left side. Make sure that that hand is not holding responsibility for stabilizing the lyre. My hand does touch the back of the lyre just barely, which is actually kind of nice because the lyre actually stabilizes my hand a little bit, but I do not use my hand to stabilize my lyre. That would limit me from moving up and down the lyre, and it creates a lot of strain in my hand, and I'm using energy to do something besides play the lyre, and that's not what I want. I want all of my energy to be utilized towards actually just playing the lyre. Okay. You want, again, I've already emphasized this, but a pretty straight wrist. You don't want your wrist bent up, down, backwards and forwards. Don't take that too strictly because, you know, I may move down here. Probably not, honestly, because my left hand is down here, but I may move a little bit. And so there's going to be a little bit of a bend. But if my hands are like this, or, you know, just some sort of exaggerated bend to it, especially this backhand, make sure that it's pretty straight, because if I have a bend, there's extra strain that's added there. Again, you can do things like change the angle of your lyre, the height of your lyre, adjust things that we've talked about already before as you notice the way in which your hands actually fall on the lyre. So the main thing for this, again, is to have that little curvature in your hand. The only other thing is that you want to be playing the strings kind of in the middle of the opening being this open spot right here. If you're too high or you're too low down here, you're not going to get a great tone to that. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the general hand posture. Let's switch now to two-handed playing. We'll do that in just a moment. All right, just a few notes on two-handed playing. Before I actually even start talking about how I do it, I want you to take notice of the way in which your lyre is strung. What I mean by this is, for me, the left side has the lowest string. The right side has the highest string. Not all lyres are strung like this. If you have questions about this, I'm happy to answer that as I can. I don't think it makes a difference personally. Some people prefer to hold the lyre on the left side. Some people prefer to hold it on the right side. And there's really just different preferences, especially if you're coming from another instrument. But for me, my lowest is on the left, my highest is on the right, and I hold it on the left side of my body. So just make sure that you know that about mine, especially if yours is different. So the way that mine is set up and the way I have it located on my body, my left hand is behind the instrument. It comes in from the back, and it plays the lower notes. Okay, my right hand is on the front and accesses the higher notes. And certainly they go up and down a little bit, but the lyre is not big enough to be moving that many different places when you're using both hands. Okay, so left hand in the back, right hand on the front. That's my preference. I think it's a pretty common way to do it. But decide which way you want to do it and stick with that. Otherwise, it's not going to work very well for you. The only other thing to note here is that I generally, when I have my hands on the lyre with both hands, they're pretty much even. What I mean by that is the fingers roughly go in a straight line here, okay, the way that I play. All right. I don't have one way higher or lower than the other is all that I mean. There's no really need for that. They have enough room. All right. Okay, that's pretty much it for the two-handed playing. Again, we'll get into more exercises and we can talk more about that later. But let's go ahead and go to our next part, which has to do with finger placement and grip on the strings. Okay, we're zooming in a bit more. We were talking about the hand, two hands. Now we're going to talk about the fingers and especially how they lay on the strings themselves. We're now on page 18. I've got a lot of close-up pictures here because I think that really helps to illustrate it. I will also, once I'm done with this video, I'll do a little video that I'll probably have pop up as we go that has more of a zoomed-in version of what I'm going to show you from this perspective, because it's going to be tough to show you, specifically where I put the string on my fingers. So I'll do that because I really want to make this clear, and it's just tough to communicate in this medium. All right, so the main point, the overall point, is that you want to have the string touching your finger on the pad of your finger. I can actually kind of show you a little bit. Let me rub this in here, get a little dent on my finger. And hopefully you can see that a little bit. Let me do it with all my fingers. It's sort of a silly thing to do, but I think it's effective. All right, I don't know if that worked, but the point is that we've got little lines here, here, and here. Again, I'll do a close-up of this. I know I'm seeing my video right now. It's not super close. I'll do that in a moment. But you want to have it, so let me back up. The main point that you want to have is that you want to have your fingers on the string in a way where they can really get a grip. So what you don't want is to have your finger barely plucking the string. I'm kind of going into the next part a little bit, but you don't want it just sort of gliding over the string. I'll talk about why in the next part. But in order to avoid that, you need to be utilizing the part of your finger that you can really, if you were to pick up something, use that part of your finger. If you were to pick it up with the tips of your fingers, it's not going to be right on the tip right next to your nail. And it's not going to be way down here. It's going to be right here in that center part. Okay. So what you don't want is to be plucking the string with your finger too far into the string, right? Too far this direction. Because we can't move very quickly. If I'm trying to grab it, so like something like this, I can't move very fast. It also just doesn't sound good. I'm pulling it in a very strange way. And my fingers are going to get all stuck in there. Okay, it just does not work very well. So make sure you're not going too far into the string. In contrast, you want to make sure that you're not plucking too close to your nail. So we don't want to go too far this way or too far this way, but somewhere right in the middle. If we go too close to our nail, it's likely that we'll catch the string with our nail, and that just produces a very different sound. My nails are really quite short, which I find helpful for the lyre and for piano playing. So I would suggest that. Some people play with their nails, and again, that's a totally valid technique. It's just not the technique that I personally use for a number of practical reasons. So don't go too close to your nail. You'll catch it on the string. And if you don't catch it on the string, you're also not going to have a great tone to it. All right. Let's go ahead and close this. Again, hopefully in the close-ups that I'll have going at this part, you'll be able to see what part of my finger I'm talking about here. I'm sorry, one more note here is that the part of your finger that touches the string should not differ depending on how far or closed, how open or closed, how far or close your hand actually is. So what I mean by this is maybe I'm playing these three notes that are right next to each other. The way in which my finger is on that string, the place in which the string is touching my finger, is the same as if I have one string in between the strings that my fingers are on. All right, that's really important because otherwise the farther out your hand is, the more, the less grip you would have on the string, and you don't want that to be the case. So take note of that. Okay, let's go now to actually plucking the string, what this method really is like. All right, so how do we actually pull the string? We've talked about our hand, we've talked about what part of the string to put on our finger, but how do we pluck or pull it? Now, I will say that personally, I used to pull the string quite lightly. This was when I started with just your your kind of mass-made Amazon lyre. And it worked all right, but it did not give me a lot of flexibility and dynamics, and it didn't give me a ton of control. So if you've looked at comments that are several years old and I say, well, I barely touched the strings, that was true then, that is definitely not true now. All right, so the general way in which I would describe how I pluck the string is actually almost to kind of pop the string. There is a kind of strength and a kind of intention to how I pull that string. So it is not light and hesitant or timid, even though the lyre is still quite quiet. Rather, now I could play quietly, and I just have a ton more control, even though I'm still pulling it pretty hard. We'll talk about dynamics later and how to adjust the level of pull in order to get different dynamics. Two things about before and after I pull the string. The first is that I actually slightly push on the string first before I pull it. So again, I'll do a zoom of this. So you should be able to see at this point me pushing in the string before I pull it. This helps to stabilize my hand. It also creates a nice tone. And it adds a natural push and pull. So rather than just pulling from a kind of zero position, it's a more organic and a more natural movement to push-pull, push-pull. Now, some may argue, and probably rightly so, that there's sort of wasted energy there. For me, it feels much more natural than to have a stagnant starting point and then try and go. It allows for fluidness in my hand, as you can probably see, rather than... And I also kind of move towards the next place that I want to go. So a slight push before I pull or pluck the string. And then finally, after plucking the string, generally speaking, my hand is kind of in a fist. Not always a total closed fist. And in the context of different songs, I don't always have time to do that because I'm moving to another piece. But it is kind of evidence of how hard I'm pulling the string to see that my hand is farther away from the lyre. I've moved in the direction that I'm playing. So if I'm going up, if I'm going down, I'm moving in that. Again, there's a kind of fluidness, a movement in the action itself that involves more than just these fingers, but my whole arm and hand. Not excessively, but just not stopping it. And generally, my hand is pretty closed, because I'm pulling it with enough force that that's where my fingers naturally go. If I don't pull with a lot of force, they're going to be more like this rather than more closed. Okay, so just so you have a general idea. Again, I'm just using my right hand because it's in the front here, but the same is true for my left hand. The left and right hand are going to feel different because there is a different amount of space between your hand and the strings, most likely. What I mean by that is that left hand is having to come around the back, so there's a lyre in between, there's wood in between your hand and the strings, whereas with your right hand that's not the case. I try not to make that difference too great or allow it to become too great, because then it really affects my playing, and my left hand becomes much less effective than my right hand. But I think it's okay if there's a little bit of a difference there. Okay, one final note is simply to say that because I push these strings, that is the main reason, one of the main reasons I would say, that the stability of my instrument is so important. I will say that when I play with the left hand, and I don't have my right hand on here for exercises, I tend to hold the lyre, because if I push too much, the lyre is going to push in a way that doesn't work well with my strap, and it tends to fall a little bit more than I want. Not always, and I wouldn't rely on that too much, but for stability's sake, I tend to hold it, because when I'm playing with both hands, my right hand is already adding a complementary pressure in the other direction. So both hands are pushing against each other, so that's part of what holds the lyre stable. Okay, let's go ahead and go now to our last section, which is just a small note about finger numbers. All right, just a quick word now about finger numbers. We are on page 20, and this is just shorthand for better communication that's used in most of the music world in regards to certain instruments like the harp or the piano. So essentially you assign certain numbers with particular fingers, and therefore I can, instead of saying thumb or forefinger or middle finger, I can just say a number and you'll know which finger I'm talking about. All right, so what are those numbers? We have both of our thumbs are 1. Our pointer finger is 2. Make sure you can see this. Good. Middle finger is 3. Ring finger is 4. We don't use the 5 in lyre playing. There's not a lot of strength, and there's not really a lot of room or need for it anyways. All right. So 1, 2, 3, 4. You will see, and I use this on the exercises, which is why I go over it now. The other image on page 20 is little arrows that point to some numbers. Those numbers above the notes indicate what finger to play with. This is usually put in there when there's a place where you need to cross over or where you need to move your hand. And it helps you just to know that you're going to have enough fingers to finish that phrase. Or if you're in the middle of a phrase, to cross over and then you can finish the phrase and you have enough fingers to do that. So it's just a helpful tool. So that's just a final word on that so that we can have some good communication there. And that's the way I'll be referring to which finger to play with as we move forward in the exercises. All right, let's go ahead and close up and we'll finish up this lesson. Okay, so that concludes our first lesson in Chapter 2. I hope this helps you take note of how you're naturally playing your lyre. And again, everything that we've talked about in Chapter 1, as well as what we talked about today, they should all go together. So how we hold our body, how we hold our lyre, and then now how we hold our hands, fingers, and how we pluck those strings. So don't be afraid to make adjustments there. Take notice of what works and what doesn't work. But make sure that you're pursuing something that is going to be good in the long run, not just something that's easiest now as you're beginning. Again, I hope this is helpful for you. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out through comments or email, and I'm happy to help you as I can. Thank you so much. We'll be back soon with Lesson 2 in Chapter 2, Lesson 2 in Chapter 2, where we will get into exercises focused on placing our hands on the lyre. So come back for that. God bless you, and may the peace of Christ be with you. Thank you so much.